A Museum of Homeless People is a museum about individuals and their experiences. It's taking this kind of look at people and analysing people, and that has existed for hundreds and hundreds of years, and that's had a very damaging effect on people because, in a sense, it aestheticizes people and it ascribes power upon people. And that's, unfortunately, one of the side effects that has occurred because of the way people who are homeless have been treated by over hundreds of years. They've been looked at, they've been analysed, they've been monitored, they've been ascribed certain characteristics. So it's a very us and them kind of museum. And so we want to get around that because ultimately homelessness is much more complicated than that, deserves something better.
Matt and Jess, welcome.
Hi.
Welcoming us to the museum. How are you doing?
Really good. Thank you for having us on the podcast today.
It's great to be on, Lewis. Thanks for having us on.
I should probably say this is a living museum. It's a community hub. So we may have community activity happening. And so if there's any interruptions, that's just part of the museum life.
Mm-hmm. Right. Can happen at any time.
I mean, there is a lot that goes into running this museum. But what I want to know firstly is, what did life look like for you two before the museum? Who were Matt and Jess before you founded the Museum of Homelessness? What were you doing?
That's a great question. Do you want to answer that one first?
I can't remember a life when beforehand. It's been 12 years nearly of a Museum of Homelessness, and it's a very different person. But I guess we were always interested in the prospect of bringing different kinds of things together. So we both were working in museums at that time and had done throughout the noughties, the early part of the last decade. But also found museums kind of unsatisfying in a lot of ways, like who they talk to, who they're for, how the foundations of how they were created. I felt for people like myself and Jess, we wanted something different from museums, and that's kind of where there was a seed of an idea to do it. But all of the other stuff that's kind of got layered on top, there's a whole other story to that, right, Jess?
Yeah, so I think before, how many years were we married for before we founded the museum? 5 years or no? Yeah. 10 years or
8 years.
8 years. So we were married for 8 years before we founded the museum. But we did both work in the arts, in museums, like Matt said. But we really wanted to do something more, and something that was creative, but that also made a better space than the ones that we were encountering in our work. And I think there's different ways you can make change. You can change institutions from the inside, that's kind of like the reform way, reformist, I should say, not reform. And that's a really important part of it. Or you can set up something new. And I think for us, we had been trying to change institutions from the inside in our jobs, and then we really wanted the opportunity as well to set up something new, and that's where Museum of Homelessness came from.
Oh, great. So that kind of answers my first question, which was kind of when did you decide to found a museum? But so was there a moment where you realised that this is what you had to do?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that moment?
Well, yeah. I mean, I basically dreamt it.
Okay.
This happens sometimes, I will wake up with a solution or an idea in my head and be like, this is the thing. And it came from connecting with someone who held a lot of homelessness heritage basically in their attic, M.T. Gibson Watt, who is the widow of the founder of the Simon community, very important grassroots organisation that basically started everything that we know about the homelessness movement today and the wider sector. We had connected with MT, and she had shared all this amazing archive that she had in her attic and said, could you two at that time we were doing freelance projects and stuff like that together as a duo. She said, could you think of a project to do with this? And we were like, yeah, let us go away and have a think about it. There could be a very cool project with that. And that's where the idea came from. So the idea of an actual whole museum of homelessness, because the archive material made us realise that no one's collecting that, and the culture and history of homelessness is, well, until we had this place that we're sat in now, was like really undocumented or uncared for or more like less visible than other histories.
So would you say that's the making history side of your work?
Yeah, and obviously Matt's a historian as well, so that's been really critical for everything that we've done, like making sure that it's very legitimate, it has really good structure and standards, as well as being radical. I think that's really important.
I think we actually have a researcher in the archive right now upstairs. It's only a small room, and we've got records and things like that in there. And he's kind of going through it now, and he's just sort of said to me, no, I was working in homelessness. I would get these reports that would land on my desk, and the archive is filled with reports. And there's nothing that the homelessness sector likes more than a report. They love doing research and making reports. It's all part of the NGO industrial complex. Coming up with solutions to things, and then people don't read the solutions. So that's existed in homelessness since 60s, 50s, probably going back earlier. And he's like, I used to get these reports and I wouldn't have time to read them, but all the answers are there. All of the solutions around homelessness are there. Just no one has time to read them. And it's the same nowadays. So there's like, from the point of view of setting up thinking about the purpose of a museum, that was why a museum, when we were 12 years ago, when we were thinking about setting it up, why we thought it was important. It's like, there's this whole kind of strange situation here where like the solutions to homelessness are being thought about, but then everyone just forgets it, and there is a bit of an amnesia around that, and there's something about knowledge and time there with homelessness that kind of gets forgotten about, and we're trying to like bring that to the fore a little bit more. The fact that actually people have done work on some of the things we need to do to change homelessness, but everyone just acts as if it's like happening for the first time. There's always these crisis headlines and things like that, but there's this whole history here that people don't know about, and that was one of the main reasons why we thought about setting it up.
Sure. So what would you say the museum sector and the homelessness sector gains from a museum of homelessness?
I think the museum sector gains another kind of branch or museum that is looking at the civic role of a museum. And I think the civic role of museums is really, really important, especially when we think about how libraries and community centres and the cuts everything faces, and the fact that everything's closing down at a time of difficulty. Museums are a crucial sort of safe space and can be a safe anchor for people, but they typically are, made in such a way that they can feel quite austere and imposing for people. They don't feel like they're for everybody. So in a Museum of Homelessness, like, this is not a museum which is like that at all. This is a museum which is trying to be, which the room that we're in is an emergency winter shelter during the winter months when temperatures drop to 0 or below. It's a museum where people eat together, garden together, make art together, and it's a museum where you can go and see exhibitions and things like that. So we're really turning the idea of what a museum can be on its head and making it for a cross-section of people who are typically excluded from museums. So I think museums gain a lot from that. I don't know about the sector. Do you want to talk about that?
For homelessness, I think formulate it. What we're helping museums do is reimagine what a museum can be. And we are trying to bring social relations back to something that is more compassionate, is more human, is more connected, is less transactional, is less over-professionalised. And so I think with the systems that are around homelessness and the thing that the sector and health and social care has like developed into, say, in 2026, is not serving homeless people. People are being failed by the system, people are being neglected, people are being let down, homelessness isn't getting solved. And I grew up in a community setting of homeless people, which is linked to the Simon community. And I think part of what we're trying to do for homelessness on this site, and which you contribute to beautifully, Lewis, is to create a community site where people really care for each other and looking after each other. And so I think where we're showing museums how we can reimagine what a museum is like we're also trying to show the homelessness sector how we can reconnect what it is to be humans together and how that is a solution to homelessness, that is a solution to addiction, and all of those things that alienate us from each other. That's what we're trying to do here for homelessness, is show, like, you can tell people as much as you want, oh, there's another way of doing things, or, you know, commission services don't have to be like this, but when people step on this site and they experience it here, that's when you can actually convince people that change is necessary. So like just the other Community Tuesday, we had occupational therapists and a psychiatric nurse from Homerton, and they're on like the rough sleeping pathway helping the community. And
why don't you just explain more about what the Community Tuesday is?
Community Tuesday is like a mayhem of, we have like between 40 and 60 people on site. This room that we're in now is like full up of people making art, and I mean really full up of people making art. You cannot move in here. We have people like running around gardening outside. We have a big community meal at 1 o'clock, which our brilliant volunteers cook, and you know, people coming from all over for that. And then there's different add-ons that we have. One week it might be solidarity massage, another week it might be haircuts in the greenhouse, which transforms into a hair studio. And so it's meeting people's needs. And tomorrow, Tuesday, we've got sexual health drop-in. But it's meeting people's needs, but it's also more than that. It's creating like connection, social glue, genuine mutual care. And I think that is the thing that's compelling. And that's the thing that you don't find in every site, in every service. Someone from the community texted me the other day and said that they've been, they're in recovery and they've been to lots of projects and spaces through that. And MOH is the only one where they feel genuinely safe, and they feel like this site's the only one that's really authentic. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve. That's been lost. And so we're trying to bring it back. That was a long answer to what we're trying to teach the homeless sector. But
no, I mean, that's beautiful. And I think that one of the way, what you described was having compassion, and mutual aid and community. And one of the ways in which you do that is by having people with direct experience of homelessness at the heart of the organisation. Can you talk about the different ways in which you make that happen? Like in the decision making and in the structures? And
I mean, we've got different governance structure. So first of all, we've got trustees on the boards with lived experience of different forms of homelessness. We've got people obviously in the senior leadership with that. We've got also a core group that makes strategic decisions around what MOH is doing. We've got lived experience of homelessness in the team as well. So it's sort of like threaded through the organisation.
I think where it gets most interesting perhaps is, and this isn't really something you can plan, but which I think is something that you can be intentional about. What we've tried to be intentional about is like symbolically having that feel within the museum as it's developed. So when we've had when we were developing this building in this space, for example, people would come to the museum and getting involved with various things. And we developed ideas around what the museum site could be. So Steve Bro, the late great Steve Bro.
Who is Steve Bro?
Well, Steve was a community organiser and busker. And we met him years ago, actually, to be fair, but he was known as a very, very legally capable person. He was so good at busking laws that apparently police would go over to the other side of the road.
They would avoid him.
They would avoid him. He was an
just outlaw them.
But he loved music, and he would come to our music nights. That's how he first kind of came along. We had some music nights when we first got here. When we first got to this site here in Finsbury Park, we were kind of trusting out a lot of different drop-ins, socials. People come, make things, develop the site. And he got involved in one of our music nights, and he loved that. And but then he kind of got involved with our gardening. And one day he just came in with sketches of a welcome wall that he wanted to see in the museum garden. Because when we first got to this space, this garden was just all overgrown. There's a lot of rubble. It looks a bit different now, but then it was it really needed a lot of care. So he kind of just made these sketches and stuff. And he used to be a bricklayer as well. Time he was with us, he was in a wheelchair, so he basically kind of got instructions together for the bricklayers, and we decided we want to have the wall to make the wall basically that he had sketched out, and you can see it if you come into the museum. It's this big kind of like orange, obviously it's orange, but it's meant to be like a welcoming hug. And we've got the sketches in our archive still, and yeah, Steve designed that, and so symbolically, I feel that says something about what's at the heart of the museum. It says something about the energy of grassroots organising, the energy of people's care and compassion. Like Steve would talk about the Museum of Homelessness being like a tree. We're only one tree, but with our branches and our leaves, we can shelter and care for others, and that can have a ripple effect. He would talk about it. So he'd give us lessons in community organising. You could see how tired myself and Jess and the team were with just getting into this building and getting it set up. So he sort of mentored us a little bit, didn't he, Jess?
He did, and I think that's the wisdom of the community, right? It's like, I think that's a really nice example, Matt, because so basically we have our formal structures like the core group, the board, blah blah blah, but then you have to have, if to do it right and to have that really authentic place that people talk about, you have to have the informal roots. Yeah. So if someone says, I want a wall built like this, we don't have like 10,000 million sign-offs. We just go, yeah, all right. And then the contractors get instructed, and then they had to redo the footing because it wasn't to his spec, and and they redid that footing. And it's like this floor in here, the community chose a certain colour of these floorboards, and then the contractors ordered a different colour, and we got them to reorder them. And like it's like if the community have chosen one floor colour and they come in and it's another floor colour, we're not doing the job. So I think it's that genuine control of decision making, really community first, that goes through the organisation like a stick of rock, we always say, and so it's not like a focus group. It's all through it, and that's how you get the feel. People can feel that.
Yeah, it's in my experience, it's kind of like there's not like this code of conduct written on walls that like everyone has to. There's no kind of authority. It's very together.
I think a code of conduct is an interesting thing because we intentionally don't have a code of conduct on the wall, because in a way then you're prescribing rules and you're prescribing boundaries, and it's not as if there are no boundaries on the site. We keep a careful eye on the space and togetherness and all these things that underpin it, but we want kind of that kind of code of conduct, for a better word, to be embodied by people just being together and relating together in a caring way. And so we try and model it, and we try and think of other ways that we can create a cohesive space, I suppose. But yeah, like we properly addressed that, didn't we? Do we have a code of conduct? And you see them in a lot of community care settings.
They do not create safety.
No.
They do the opposite, because everyone goes, and anyone who is in care or in prison or in the hostels, they're going to have a certain reaction to that. So we don't really believe in them, do we?
No.
I've heard you say a couple of times that you are a museum of homelessness, not of the homeless. What is that distinction in your minds?
I think a museum of homelessness is about homelessness in its broadest sense. It could be a museum where we think about the criminalisation of homelessness that goes back to far into history, or it could be something that we look at quite specifically in relation to systems of care that aren't working properly, not necessarily about people. A museum of homeless people is a museum about individuals and their experiences. It's taking this kind of look at people and analysing people, and that has existed for hundreds and hundreds of years, and that's had a very damaging effect on people, because in a sense it aestheticizes people and it ascribes power upon people, and that's unfortunately one of the side effects that has occurred because of the way people who are homeless have been treated by over hundreds of years. They've been looked at, they've been analysed, they've been monitored, they've been ascribed certain characteristics. So it's very us and them kind of museum, and so we want to get around that, because ultimately homelessness is much more complicated than that, deserves something better.
Do you have an opinion on? It's not so much in England, but like I guess in America, there is this push to describe, use terms like unhoused people. Do you have an opinion on whether that, on what that, where that might be coming from, or what that does? The Museum of the Unhoused situation, maybe.
That's so. That I think that's coming out of the left, and I think that's coming out of the academic left. I bet that's not coming from the streets. I don't know. I'm not in America, but I'd put money on the fact that that's. I'd put money on the fact that phrase is coined by people who don't have experience of homelessness, and to me, it feels like saying unhoused is a way of. I think what they're trying to do is destigmatize the experience of homelessness, but it's relating it to housing when, in my experience, people can full well be homeless with a roof. Like I do believe that strongly. So
That's quite interesting, actually.
Yeah.
Because I've heard people say, "Oh, they have a home, they just don't have a house." Right, and that's like the distinction that people have said.
they have a house, they don't have a home.
Yeah. Oh no, they don't have a house,
Yeah.
and that's why they're called unhoused.
Yeah.
But they have a
But
home.
yeah, but
Well,
then
they say
some,
unsheltered is another one they say.
Yeah.
That's a new one. Have you heard that one?
I haven't.
Unsheltered.
But is there something in the distraction of constantly coming up with new
Yeah.
names?
To me, it is. It's like, okay, so basically, it's like, it happened to here a little bit as well. Like, first of all, it was people with experience of homelessness rather than homeless people. Okay, fine, whatever. But then at one point, I remember a group started saying, oh, we should be called people with insight into homelessness. And then it's like, well, how far are we going to go with this? And actually, what is any of that doing to solve homelessness? Is it really? And it's about, if we're talking about policing language or playing with language rather than actually, and language is important, obviously, but I just think we've got to have a balance between, working with language and taking action. And maybe that's not fair to people in America who are saying unhoused, because I know like quite a lot of the groups who are active on doing stuff on the streets would use that language. For me, right, as someone with lived experience myself, I don't care that much. Like, if it's not a slur, then it's not such a big deal to me. Having debates over whether to say unhoused or homeless, like, to me, that's a waste of energy when we've got the biggest crisis since records began. It's like, yeah, I feel like, what do you think, Matt, about these circles where it's like playing with the language? Or
I don't know enough about it, I would suggest, but what I would say that maybe there's something in the idea of home being weaponized. So homeless is seen as a kind of it's sort of I guess the best way I could describe it is, we had a poet in residence, still do, called Surfing Sofas, and he has a poem that starts with home is where the heart is, so if I don't have a home, am I heartless? So maybe he's kind of like inverting it, which is quite clever. So maybe what these academics we're talking about are doing is saying, if we call them homeless, then we're sort of dehumanizing them.
that's what I think they're saying.
That's what they're saying. But I don't know if using unhoused really changes that. It's just you replacing house with home, so you've still got the same thing of dehumanization.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, the thing is like, I get where people are coming from, but my personal opinion is that the people who use it already generally have an awareness and a care anyway. Yeah. And so it's kind of just talking to ourselves a bit, navel gazing, because the people who are demonizing homeless people or people who experience homelessness are not listening to this, and they're not saying it. That's kind of my opinion. So it's kind of a bit of a waste of energy, in my opinion. But I wanted to touch on what you said about the crisis that is going on in the country, in the world, really, and some of the work that you do around that. And one that I wanted to touch on is the Dying Homelessness Project. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. I think the Dying Homeless Project is an interesting example. It's an interesting example when the Museum of Homelessness becomes a bit of a head scratcher for people. They're kind of like, "What's this museum?" because it's a very comprehensive investigation of systems of care that we run here in the museum. And it was actually originally started by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. So it started off as a deep dive piece of investigation. It started because a journalist noticed that there were no records or data set relating to like mortality rates and homelessness.
So when was that?
It was in 2017.
So before then, there was no data set for...
No one was counting.
No one was counting.
I mean, there are no reliable statistics on
Not on a
homelessness,
national level.
for that. No, never have been. I mean, one thing you could say is, I don't know, like if you look at Elizabethan burial records for certain parishes, the parish system probably kept better records than we do in the modern times, because they would record people's names, they would record people's sort of attributes and features about them and where they resided. So you can actually use it, but all of that has been completely stripped away in the modern era, and no one was really recording it. There were a few church services and other kinds of gatherings, I think, that started in the 20th century, but they were always ad hoc. There was no comprehensive list. So Maeve McClenaghan, who was at the Bureau at the time, started collecting information, which she got through freedom of information requests, which she got through submissions from organisers, people who work in homelessness, people who are homeless. She just gathered this information, and when it came time for them to wrap this investigation, and it got a lot of press attention, and actually led to the Office of National Statistics counting for the first time homeless deaths, we said we would continue, because in our community, you know, people would talk about the Museum of Homelessness as a place that they could go to remember people they'd lost. You know, grief and death is a part of homelessness, sadly, and so it felt appropriate that we would continue, and we basically continued the investigation in exactly the same way the Bureau had run it, and we've been doing that now for many, many years. And it's a monitoring project. We're monitoring the information, numbers of people, but we're also memorializing people.
Yeah, so that's what...
that's the most important thing.
Yeah, so the result of that work is that you give people the chance to memorialize their community, which you do a memorial, don't you?
Yeah, we have over 8,500 people on our memorial who have died since 2017. So we collect those names, those people, year round, and it's a big undertaking. We publish findings every year in October, and we have a vigil outside the Prime Minister's house in Downing Street to remember people. And there are other vigils as well that have been organised as well in other contexts, you know. So, yeah, it's a deeply sad part of our work, but very important.
Yeah, it is incredibly important. And I think alongside the giving people the opportunity to remember members of their community, has anything structural come from the work you've done on collecting that data?
Lately, last couple of years, there has been extra funds released by the government. Last year, it was 10 million for winter shelters, because we identified that there was a more than 40% increase in people dying on the street the year before that. So we believe that they beefed up the winter shelter fund in direct response. And then this year they released 86 million. Was it 86 million or
84?
84 million. Matt's better with like stats. I'm not that good at remembering them. But 84 million for funding after our findings came out, and we do believe that it was tailored specifically to some of the findings, like around family homelessness, because we recorded a number of children that had died for the first time, which was heartbreaking. So it's leading to more cash for homelessness services. Might I say, not ours. So this is not about MOH getting funds, because we don't take government money, but this went out to the sector, which we're pleased about, more resource for the sector. And then that was one big structural thing. And then the other thing is the Labour government's new national plan to end homelessness has cited that research. So it has shaped policy, which we're pleased about. It's heartbreaking work, but if it can prevent, if it can prevent one death, then it's worth it. So hopefully we'll start to see more changes from it.
And we will talk more about the present day later on. But I want to ask you about the history, right? You are a museum, you do exhibitions, you have an exhibition coming up. What can you tell us about your upcoming exhibition opening in spring?
Criminal.
It's called Criminal.
An untold history of homelessness, resistance and survival. And it looks at criminalisation of homeless people since the 1600s. And we're looking at particularly the UK and Ireland, the Americas and the Caribbean as like key sites where what we're calling the homelessness Big Bang started. So it's when enclosures were really ramping up. It was the beginning of the international slave trade. It was the beginning of, the really kind of time when empire started really expanding. And so there was a moment where the men who ran the Virginia Company, for example, who set up the plantations in Virginia, the first ones in America, and we've found records where they went to the Mayor of London and they said, we've got a solution for you with these swathes of vagrants that you're finding in the city, because there was mass urban homeless for the first time due to the enclosures and those changes. So they transported people out to build the plantations. And the exhibition really looks at that, those like oppressions that happened and horrific things that came out of empire, but also the solidarity that different groups found in those settings, and then the ways that the powers that be would like racially divide people, and which we still see today with homelessness. Homelessness is weaponized against migrants. That was happening in the early plantations as well. And these sort of methods for causing social division amongst working class people basically started then and are still really effective today. So criminalisation is such a key part of that. So the exhibition is going to look at that, and it's going to look at some of the things that we can do as well to challenge it.
I mean, that is a lot to cover, so they'll have to come down to find out. But you mentioned the enclosures.
Yeah.
What is that? What is the enclosure movement?
So the enclosure movement really is a movement that really sort of ramped up in earnest in the 1600s, and it created, in a sense, mass homelessness, because 21% of England's landmass was eventually enclosed. It replaced something called the open.
What does enclosed mean?
Yeah, so enclosed means that common land that would be farmed, what was called the open field system. So that would be kind of commonly farmed for crops and for trade. That was essentially taken by private landowners, landlords, and for increasingly, really in terms of agricultural production and efficiency, that was why it was done. Land would be closed off from people so it could be used more efficiently, but it displaced vast numbers of people. And there are 5,200 of enclosure bills from Parliament over the span of a few hundred years from the early 1600s. So it really is the period in history which starts and train the kind of urban, sort of increasing urbanization, eventually the Industrial Revolution and what we kind of understand as the making of the modern world. It kind of has a huge impact on that, and that 21% of the landmass of England, and obviously it happened elsewhere in other parts of the UK too, is a significant amount over many, many hundreds of years. So that's what enclosure did. It was resisted. People would try to assert their common rights on the land. They would organise counter petitions. You can look at county archives and see how hundreds of these bills were resisted. Often half of them were taken down, but they just came in alarming frequency. And essentially it was about money, power, really. That's why land was enclosed from people. People would also try to break through, hedge breakers they were called. And really you hear the term vagrant a lot in history, and that term was used to delegitimize the movement. A vagrant really is essentially the pre-modern homeless person, and it was automatically associated with criminality. That's what we're trying to say in the exhibition, that homelessness was a way of describing someone in the early modern period, but it was always associated with criminality, because to be homeless in the early modern England and Wales and elsewhere was to have no place. It wasn't to be what you weren't part of the master apprentice or the or the master servant orthodoxy. You were on the road, and that was why you see so much criminalization. So that term would be used to criminalize anyone who tried to resist it. Anyone who would try to resist enclosure would get that kind of treatment. So what we're trying to do in the exhibition is also show how information was used and how many of the myths and stigmas that we understand around homelessness come from that time and are still with us today.
Yeah, in my mind, it's like you have human history in which the relationship between the human and the land and moving around was very much part of the human experience. Then you have the sudden stop of like, no, you're not allowed anymore. We're cutting it off. This is mine. And when I was reading about this stuff, it was looking at the difference between, is it true like in England you can't have a private beach, but in America you can have a private beach? So like the coastline is like commons still.
Oh, I don't know, but that would make sense given the amount of footpaths that are on cliffs.
Cliff
That
lines.
would make a lot of sense. Yeah, I think the British carried out the enclosures in England and Wales, then did unspeakable things in Ireland, and then the same methods were like used in the Caribbean, in the Americas to enclose. And there's etchings and stuff from those times which show the way that the British would enclose land in all of those places. And the one of the outcomes of that is homelessness, which was then criminalised. It's like to add insult to injury. Like, we'll turf you off your land, and then we're going to criminalise you for not having land. So that's it's crazy, really.
And criminalisation was done through ideas. So you can look at the work of seminal figures like Martin Luther, who created the Protestant Reformation, or figures like Thomas Harmon, who created books like A Caveat for Common Courtesies, and he invented terms around that became Elizabethan legislation, and it was always associated with idling or duplicitous means. And so strong are these archetypes that even today, when people talk about a begging transaction, someone that they might interact with on the street, there's always this kind of undercurrent of, will that person use the money for something fraudulent? And this was created very deliberately by people in the 1500s who were wanting to typecast people who were mobile as in some way kind of placeless or criminal, because it was very, very threatening to Elizabethan authorities. It was very, very threatening for these authorities to be expanding and creating colonies, because they encountered nomadic indigenous people who were also living a mobile existence. And so it really was a conflict. And that's why we're kind of creating this exhibition, to kind of show how powerful how powerful a hold these ideas still have on people's mentality today.
It's still with us today.
Yeah.
People get moved on from the bench at the top.
There is a knock at the door. Do you want to go for it, or do you think?
I think Rachel's
got it. Okay. So that you had that period with the beginning of the enclosure movement, and then a couple of hundred years later, you have the kind of formalization with the Vagrancy Act, right? And this is something that I know is still in the kind of DNA of legislation, is that it's designed to manage homelessness, and this is something that you say a lot, designed to manage homelessness, not solve it. Can you talk about what happened with the Vagrancy Act in the Victorian or maybe the Georgian period?
It was 1824, so it was Victorian. It was just late Georgian, just before Queen Victoria. The Vagrancy Act came about because of the post-Waterloo period with the Napoleonic Wars. There was a large cross-section of soldiers who had come back to the British Isles, and there was a lot of what's the ill feeling, bad sentiment. People were struggling. And so the Vagrancy Act reflected increasing anxiety about that cross-section of people. So in 1819, I think it was, the Society of Mendacity was created by people in power. And it reflects a kind of normal trend that you see throughout history of the authorities getting anxious about people, and then coming up with new ways of criminalising them. And so that eventually led to the Home Secretary, Robert Peel, creating the Vagrancy Act in 1824. He was heavily pressured to do so. And then 5 years later, he also created the first ever police force, the Metropolitan Police. So criminalisation of homelessness is in that legislation. It's still on the books. It's supposed to be repealed in spring fully. They announced it, but there have been a number of announcements about repealing the Vagrancy Act, and it hasn't ever quite happened, but it is supposed to happen.
They
in the
announce it
spring.
every year.
But
We're gonna repeal it.
what does the Vagrancy Act do?
It criminalises people for sleeping rough,
Okay.
which is obviously abhorrent. And it's 1824. We shouldn't have that law in place now or ever, but particularly not now. But what we're quite worried about is that they, you know, like Matt just said, when the authorities get anxious about a subset of society, they make laws to criminalise that subset. Well, what have we got? You know, we've got respect orders coming in. Sakir Starmer's.
What is a respect
A
order?
respect order is part of. It's going to be a new type of order that can be enforced through the latest criminalisation legislation. Like every couple of years for the last 15 years, we've had like new criminalisation legislation. And some of it's much worse than the Vagrancy Act. Like, so this got thrown out in the end, but the Tories were proposing one that criminalised people for smelling too much. Like, and then the respect orders are going to be ostensibly about antisocial behaviour, but they're going to include begging. So
There's a heavy focus on begging.
is a heavy focus on begging. So it's like street life and people surviving at street level, whether or not the Vagrancy Act is in place, are going to be criminalised. And what they tend to do is say they're going to repeal the Vagrancy Act 'cause it sounds right, and basically everyone can agree on it. Everyone's like, yeah, 1824 law has got to go in the bin. But they've been just putting in more and more and more criminalisation legislation. Is really profound, like the amount of ways that you can get done by police or councils or like plastic police or whoever or private security. Like, it's very hard to exist in the public realm now. That's where we're at. So it's the criminalisation is happening kind of like all around us, not just the Vagrancy Act.
Well, this is the thing, as homelessness is now, or has been, getting more and more kind of visible, or maybe more and more harder to ignore for a while now. And for some people, that kind of gives a sense of compassion and kind of like, oh my God, what can we do? What can we do about it? But I think for other people, the response, maybe from authorities, from police, is a more less compassionate approach. And you get that sense, or I've got that sense, that in the public atmosphere, there is both this, what can we do about this? And also, I don't want to deal with this. Get rid of it. And a lot of the laws, legislation, seems to be trying to solve the back end of homelessness, or not solve it, but kind of deal with the back end. Like you said, dealing with people based on like how they're presenting in public, rather than solving the causes and conditions of it. Where do you think the atmosphere is now? Have you felt that there is, from police and government, where do you think they are landing on this?
It's we do a lot of comparison with what's happening in America. So what's happening in America is like the opposite end of it's the sharp end of, you know, the executive orders and everything that Trump's been putting through regarding encampments and stuff like that. That's what we're really worried about, that happening here. So we do a lot of thinking and research about it. And rightly so, because the same lobbyists and policy influencers are like, they're working on both locations. They're working on the American politics, they're working on ours. However, I think there's a fundamental difference in like the British public and also in in some of our infrastructure, which does give me like some like tiny cause for optimism, because I think there's more compassion towards people who are homeless than you have in America, honestly, because of how our welfare state works. And I think there's a cultural difference in how we respond to homelessness in this country. So although we're always watching and we're always challenging the legislation, we do also like hope that it will never get to that point where it is now in America. And I do think we are still a long way off that. So for example, like Camden and the Met Police were challenged legally by Liberty and colleagues at Streets Kitchen, and a person experiencing homelessness whose his tent was binned. He teamed up with Liberty, took them to court, got an apology off the Met. So this was about binning tents, and there was public uproar as well about this. So it really helped to make a strong case. This Christmas Eve, we were in the West End doing some street work, checking in with people. And as we came to this connection at St. Martin's, we found Westminster Council like binning some tents. So we were obviously like, what's going on here? And like, went and did the bystander thing and checked in. And they were like, no, it's okay. We were doing it like with the permission of the people who stay in this tent. We're like, we'll believe that when we hear it. Where are they? And it was this amazing woman, Bridget. She was there with her dogs, and she had agreed for them to put that tent. It was a tent that she was done with, basically. So to me, it was quite a big change, because rather than just binning the tents in a dehumanising way and thinking they could get away with it, they were in dialogue with the people living in those tents, only getting rid of what they'd given permission for. And it sounds like a small thing, but in homelessness advocacy, that's quite a big shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I feel like when America's going that way, that's a little shift for us in the right direction. So let's keep pushing for that, through the legal routes, through doing bystander work, and through making sure that the public are kept informed, and that you can galvanise that public support as well, because the British public does have compassion, right?
I know we were talking about history earlier, but I think wanted to say something about that, because the whole reason why all of this, what they call rogue literature, existed in the 1500s, where they invented all of these myths about people that have kind of been historically discredited. They made up that they spoke a special language called a thieves' can. And they created a huge typology of different kinds of people, that this type of person will fake a disability. This kind of person will go house to house with his wife and knock on doors. This kind of person will invent war wounds, which they probably got in a drunken brawl. All of that made it into Elizabethan legislation. But they did that because they were so concerned about the do-gooding public who were helping people who were on the road. And that was why they went to such extraordinary lengths to try and discredit people like that, because they wanted to try and change the public's outlook on supposed placeless people. And so there's always been these myths and stereotypes that have kind of dehumanized nomadic, wandering, homeless people. But that's because there's such a strong sentiment of compassion. People want to help each other. So it goes back into the history books as well, and we see that today.
I mean, you just got me thinking of how they still do that, and they still find new ways of doing that, and how what they did for the last 10 years was anyone that kind of cared about anyone was just like, woke, you're woke. Mm-hmm. And even to the point where I saw one of these American manosphere people on a podcast who had a daughter, and he said, I don't want to sound like one of those woke people, but like, women have it really hard, man. But that is the propaganda in which caring about other people. It was before it was woke. It was bleeding heart liberal, or it's seen as like unrealistic or a danger. And it's really tempting to kind of buy into that. I even heard like on a like left wing kind of like media people talking about how we kind of stop treating homelessness as a criminal a criminal act and as a kind of like social welfare act. And she said, oh, but you still need to move them on from the park, you know? And this was in this time just after Donald Trump got elected, so everyone was trying to be like, attack woke and stuff like that. And I just thought it is really tempting how they get you. And sorry, I'm going on a rant now, but they get you also in school. Like, you're told really from really early on, if you do this, you will be rich, and if you do that, you will be homeless, and therefore you deserve the lot you get. And you kind of walk around as a young person thinking, well, that person must have done something wrong, and that person must be morally correct. And I think in America, that sense is even bigger, and that's what I have Donald Trump, because he must be good because he's richer than me. Sorry, that was my rant. In terms of, you said there's a cultural difference with America, right? Is there anything that we can learn, though? Are there choices that have been made in America that we can learn? Because they're, like you said, they're further ahead than us. They have their homelessness situation is more extreme than us, particularly in California and New York. Are there actually choices that aren't just cultural?
American colleagues who worked in museums, still work in museums, who are dealing with everything that, because the Trump administration is not only attacking the homelessness sector, it's attacking museums as well. They've given us quite a stern warning that you've got a window now to put stuff into plan, put stuff into practice, that we never had, because they say they were totally taken by surprise with the rapid speed of all the change. And so I suppose in terms of learning from like what they're telling us would be to, I just said, didn't I, then, that I felt optimistic, but that's a sliver of optimism. I think we also just need to prepare for the worst as well.
And what does that preparation look like?
I think it means creating networks of people that can activate really quickly. And like we did that a little bit during COVID. We had good partnerships in place, which meant we could activate and take action really quickly when there was a threat to the community. She's saying that Elaine Herman Gurian, the American museum professional that I saw speak at this conference, which I'm referring to, she was like, we're having to put plans into place now to hide our colleagues. It would be a lot better if we'd have had, so that they're not dragged off by ICE. And she's like, if we had rehearsed that, it would have been so much better, because she's like, I've already had people disappear.
Wow.
Yeah. So this was the stark warning that she gave us. So it really is like having your networks ready, getting as many resources in place as possible, and doing as much prep work so that when the shit really does hit the fan, we're ready. We know what our emergency action is going to be.
Can you talk a little bit about how, if any, has the choices around the immigration policy impacted your work tackling homelessness or the homelessness community in general? Is that a big question, or?
It's a really important one.
I mean, of course, immigration is such a lightning rod issue, and the facts are so divorced from reality in terms of how they're reported. So we face multiple challenges of protecting people, also communicating about it, and then dealing with the kind of, I think, the trauma that comes up from just how much injustice there is around it. Like people who are in the immigration system face so much difficulty, and the UK as a whole, like in terms of migrants per capita, like we're sort of fifth, sixth in terms of European countries, even lower actually if you account for certain things. So we're certainly not taking the most refugees and migrants into the UK. This is just a complete myth. But what happens is everything's coalesced around these kind of toxic kind of disinformation wars that exist around hotels, and that's like legitimized a kind of media discussion around the fact that something like the Bibi Stockholm could exist, or Napier Barracks, really like inhumane conditions that anyone who's working in an official capacity knows is terrible. We've seen the Home Office Inspectorate talk about places like Napier Barracks as being unfit for human habitation. This is like essentially basically like a concentration camp, but it's kind of just normalized. So we have to kind of like work against this very sort of strange and toxic kind of discourse that exists. And then you've got the immediate hardship that people in the immigration system can't work. They are not entitled to benefits. They're in very unstable situations. They're often affected by significant traumas. So all of that shapes homelessness a lot, I would suggest. And because, you know, people become homeless very easy who are in the immigration system. I think there's been research done that if you're an EU national in the immigration system, you're twice as likely as a UK national to become homeless. Then you've had rule changes that the Home Office have made in the last few years, which have just shortened anyone who gets a positive asylum decision is almost immediately made homeless. And that's just like the government trying to act tough. But it's just a totally nonsensical decision that's caused mass homelessness in the last few years. So we're dealing with like the hostile environment and all of that kind of regulatory stuff that makes life difficult for people and then people's everyday lives. And then we've got this kind of like circus around it as well, where no one is really, you know, it just feels like people aren't thinking straight on on the whole thing.
It is hysterical, isn't it? And it's really important to us that because of the way that homelessness has been weaponised in the service of racism, xenophobia, and particularly in the last few years, that's become a core element of MOH's work, like trying to challenge that and heal things. And that ranges from a whole bunch of stuff. Like we run a housing deposit and first month's rent scheme for people coming out of the immigration system. And we challenge it in like our campaigning as well. But also we create a site here where people of all kinds of experience of homelessness are welcome, and those kind of divisions, because those divisions do happen in the community as well, and you will find it at street level. And I think it's just about trying to create a site where people from all different walks of life can come together and understand each other better and form really healthy and caring relationships. That's a big part of it as well, because it's baked in, yeah. So migrant services are always separated from homelessness services, which when we started out this MOH, I found completely baffling. And then the other thing is housing and homelessness are really separate. So you have like in the NGO industrial complex, you'll have like 3 types of organisation: the homelessness ones, the housing ones, the migration ones. Well, come on, it's like the same community really, isn't it? Or they're structural issues that are creating the same community. So we've always tried to close those silos in MOH's work. And that's been really, really interesting because you get pushback from other types of organisation as well. And it's quite weird. Like I found that quite weird. So yeah, we're tackling it from all angles, I suppose. And it is probably one of the biggest issues for homelessness today, the hostile environment. Like it just is.
Yeah. And you said something that I think really hits on it. You said the governments are acting tough and making the situation worse. And like when I put my tinfoil hat on, I think that's the point. Like they want to make the situation worse. And it really frustrates me when I see people who are maybe more kind of on the right and talking about, oh, we're dealing with migrants, but we're not dealing with our own homeless people. There's our own who are on the streets, and then there's rarely any effort to actually help people who are on the streets. And I'm starting to think that we are not dealing with homelessness because we are just talking about immigration all the time, and governments don't have to build housing or supply support for communities because they just have to bang on about immigration, and that will get people attention.
Completely. Yeah, definitely. That's just what you've just said, just rings so true. It's like, yeah, it's not, there's nothing practical being done, is there? They're just using it as a smokescreen.
Yeah.
You know, it's very frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, it's always talked about on the basis of a comparison. It's always, this group is in this brilliant situation and this group is in this terrible situation. But they're talking about bringing together 2 completely different sets of circumstances and people. You know, people in the immigration system can't work, can't really earn above a certain amount, you know, are forced in a way to be institutionalized. They don't really choose to live in dispersal accommodation where they're often sent, or hotels. They're institutionalized in that setting, but they're compared with people who have a completely different set of abilities, privileges, you know, but also have gone through completely different things as well. So they shouldn't even be compared in the very beginning, but they are. So it's a sort of weird false equivalence, I would suggest.
I think
that makes sense.
It does. You mentioned that the divisions exist within the community, right?
Yeah.
On the streets, and sometimes I guess those divisions might come into the museum in some way, but you create an environment, and I'm trying to move to a positive light now as we move to the end of the interview. You create an environment that is inclusive, but there's going to be people who don't understand all forms of identity or have preconceived notions of where people come from. What are techniques, skills, or just ways in which you hold the space that allow for people to that bring people along into this inclusive space?
Yes, I think that's so. I'd say that's like there's no hard and fast rule to like how you either challenge a viewpoint or make a decision as to, you know, what can be worked with and what's unacceptable in the space, or because it's like it's a practice and it's on a case by case basis. So, say if someone's saying a viewpoint that they've kind of like been fed and they're saying it, but we know that person and we know that there's not like real intent of harm behind it, then with that person we'd say, oh, really, should we chat about that? What do you think? It's this, this and this, or, you know, really it's this. Say someone comes in with like anti-small boats views because that's been shared online a lot with working class men. So that with that we try and work with that. But if someone is being like, you know, using racist slurs and stuff like that, there would be a different conversation to be had, considering whether that person can safely be on site or not. It's the same with the gender. Like if someone misgenders someone by accident, that's different to if they're sharing conviction transphobic views. Like they're two different things. Does that make sense? And I think in order to meet people with compassion and create those relationships of people who wouldn't normally meet each other and who have been probably fed like a lot of crap about each other in their different bubbles, to create, that's how you heal society, is to be able to bridge those divides safely without causing harm, without putting people at undue harm, but to bridge the divide safely is so important. Like that's the key work in a really polarized world. And to do that on site, it takes a bit of skill within the team, but you're part of that team, Lewis, and I'm really happy to say that we do have a brilliant team who can make those judgment calls and who can gently support someone to reconsider their views, or who can draw a line when it's too much. And I think that's part of the practice. So sorry, I haven't got like a formula for it, but it's like a daily thing, isn't it? You know, because you've done it, you've done that work here as well, and you're really good at it. It's just
and I think when people come together in person, that work is a lot easier. And I think that's how polarization works, that people aren't together with people. You know, it is a kind of filter bubbles, group thing kind of thing. And so much of the answer is just about being in spaces together with people where understanding can be fostered. I know that's a bit cliche, but it is definitely something we try, which is something that is just obvious. That's what needs to happen.
No, yeah, I think that's true, and just knowing people, and I think it's helped me to understand that the far right is targeting the community, you know, to get foot soldiers essentially, and a lot of people that I encounter have good hearts, but have hard lives and are kind of like susceptible to maybe that kind of narrative. And the only antidote to that is the showing that like there is a community and there are people with them, and that community is big and it's different, you know. I've had experience with guys in the community who've said something a little bit funny about maybe small boats or something like that, or hotels. And it's been like a one-time thing, you know, and it's just because it's in the news and everyone's talking about it at that point. And then they're asking me how my boyfriend is, you know, and you think, okay, so this isn't like a steadfast position. And it's actually quite interesting. If I'd read it on like a tweet, I might have had a different reaction to it than knowing someone in the community, seeing them week on week, and knowing where they're coming from. I think it's totally different. Like, it's tough because so much of the hate is being done on social media and people have got their phones attached to them, but being in person is how you kind of like really get to know someone else as a human being, I guess.
It's the only way that we get through this. Like in real life, like it's got to be done. I love what you just said about people who've got good hearts but hard lives. That really summarises it and really well. And I think, there's so much that can be done in real life to bring together a real range of people. And that's why as well, I think it's really important that we have safe spaces where people of a particular protected characteristic can get the services that they need safely. But we've always said MOH should be as diverse as possible and have like such a range of people involved, because like part of our like aim for the space is to have those connections that you can't get somewhere else, because that's a big part of it.
Yeah, and all I would add is like on the moment of hope kind of bit is like we know, you know, social media has been kind of present in this conversation, but you know, social media usage apparently peaked in 2022. I saw some research the other day, so I think people are much more bring a much more healthy suspicion to the different platforms they're using, and there's these days, and there's much more literacy around how people are fed information. So maybe over time, what we understand now as kind of disinformation or filter bubbles or things like that are kind of really have stoked up a lot of division. I'm not saying we're not seeing the back of it by any means, but things might shift a bit more in a positive direction. I mean, I'm hopeful for that. Yeah, my own social media use is just like non-existent, basically. So everyone should be like me.
I did see a good result of the social media over Christmas when, did you see, I'm sure you saw that Manchester incident where the hotel refused to let someone, obviously an organisation who'd organised for homeless people to stay in a hotel, the hotel refused to let them stay and said on camera that it's because we know they're homeless. That video went viral and the hotel apologised, and of course they couldn't stay there that night. It was too late, but
the response to that online. Do you see what we mean about?
Yeah, that's
like
exactly
there's something culture. No, it's not. I don't want to make like broad sweeping statements about culture.
But there is.
But people were like, what the? People were generally like
appalled by that.
Appalled, like so, and that's what that gives us hope as well. You know, I remember that.
Yeah, when given with the like barefaced facts of the situation, people do find it abhorrent and want to do something. So I always end on these questions. Matt and Jess, what have you had enough of?
I've had enough of the rise of the far right. Can we just stop with that now already, please? Just switch that off.
How do we do it?
Yeah, we'll keep trying. It'd be so nice to just be able to do it like that, wouldn't it? Switch it off. Yeah, switch it off now. And then what I can't get enough of at the moment is my little cat sitting by the fire with her and just chilling. That's really nice.
Nice. What about you, Matt? What have you had enough of and what can't you get enough of?
Oh, God, I've had enough of this rain. Like, we're recording this after the wettest ever January. And, I'm sorry, it was very profound going on about the far right and stuff, politics. But I'm just, like, really wet. So I don't want to be that anymore. But, climate change is it's important. And then I can't get enough of this. Chess. Oh yeah, we've got a good thing going on with chess at the museum at the moment.
Oh yeah, you're doing a tournament, right?
We're doing the Street Legends chess tournament.
Matt plays chess like every day.
See?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but there's some very good players in the community. including players who have like won big tournaments in places like prison.
We've got prison champs.
Or like
in the community.
people who like play club chess at
Okay.
quite a high level. Yeah. So they all want to come along and get involved.
But that
It's
is
good
what
vibes.
you can't get enough of because you play chess every day.
Well, I've been enjoying it recently, because I'm looking for because I think I'm going to be the tournament moderator, and it'll
Nice.
be really, really fun. But it can be quite stressful as well. So I don't
Chess?
Yeah.
Well, I imagine. Yeah, I imagine.
Well,
it's a
you spend an
competition.
hour or something and playing something and you lose, and that can be quite stressful.
Well, there was that video of the chess master who lost and he like smashed the table. What was he called? Magnus something?
Magnus Carlsen.
Yeah. It was quite
he's a
embarrassing
top
for him.
player.
But with the rain, I think the rain is important because, like, when people think about homelessness and the difficulties of homelessness, they think about cold. You've done a lot of work to make people think about the heat, and I think people think about heat more often. But people don't think often about the rain, and like, that's a tough. Like raining all the time is a tough time to be homeless.
People say it's the worst.
Yeah, and people have said, it gets in your bones. I know people who have experienced homelessness who are inside now who the rain they won't get wet. Like that's like their thing. It's like a real trauma.
And the rain worries me a bit because it's really there. Like the flooding that we're seeing. No one's really taught. It gets reported as like a sort of one-off incident in the news, like it's flooded in York or something. But flooding is so pervasive now. We're seeing big, significant floods all over the UK, especially in the winter time. And we've just had the wettest January on record. So I do think it's a serious issue. But I don't want to. It's just
Right, I think you should tell us. Criminal. When's it on? How can we find out about
It's
it?
opening May 21st, and it'll be Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. 10 weeks only, so people need to get here, check it out, completely free, and unlike any other exhibition they've ever been to.
And we're also we're gonna have some banging pieces of art as well. It's not just stuff about the Vagrancy Act, which I feel like we've said a lot about. We also have some really banging pieces of art, sculpture in the garden, and other things. So come along, check out
murals.
great art
And a talk series
And talk series.
and a great talk series.
to be announced.
Well, thank you, Matt and Jess. It's been a pleasure and a joy. Thank you. Cut. If you have liked this episode and would like to support us, please like and subscribe, share with friends, and follow us on all our social medias. See you soon.